Why does anyone write a book? Why does anyone publish a book? Why does anyone design, program, and publish a new video game? There's a kind of judgment on your character. It tells you something about who you are in terms of the answer you give. Some of you may think you're very cynical and very cosmopolitan and very worldly, and you say money. Let's just say the motivation is money. I've been in the theater. Nobody is performing Shakespeare for money. Okay, nobody. I know this is going to sound ridiculous to you. Okay, it's not worth it. It's so horrible. The process of memorizing this script, showing up every day, rehearsing it, being on stage, and the worst thing of all about live theater is that you can't kid yourself about who's in the audience. So you go through all this crap just to perform Shakespeare for these schlemiels, these imbeciles in the audience who really have no understanding and no refinement at all. You get to see who these people are. No, there's something else. There's something that motivates you to perform Shakespeare. All right. And it's for everyone involved in the process. There are people who invest in the theater. There are investors who have to be drawn together in a conference room. You sit them down around a desk and you say, hey, look, guys, I know there aren't that many intellectuals here in Niagara-on-the-Lake. You're in some third grade. Oh, you know what's great? Great example. The retirement towns in Florida. All those towns, the beach towns in Florida, every single one of them has a theater. And they do opera and they do Shakespeare and those guys. Okay, guys. Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. Even the people who are putting the money in. You're a guy, you don't have to be that wealthy. You're someone with a few $1 million. You could be putting your few $1 million into the stock market. You could be putting your few $1 million into gold, frankly. You could do anything with your few $1 million, and let's say for a 2-year period of this investment. There is absolutely no chance that you are bankrolling the performance of William Shakespeare, that you are funding this with the expectation of making it, or that you are primarily doing it to make money. You'd be amazed the extent to which everyone involved in the process. I'm not saying money isn't a factor, right? It's that it's not the primary motivating factor. Who the hell goes into the book publishing industry today? Like whether it's the writer, the investor, the publisher, the distributor, who's in this business to make money now in 2022? I think it would be more fair to say for all these industries. And part of my thesis in this video is that now the video game industry is becoming more and more like book publishing. And book publishing is changing too. Book publishing is becoming more and more like the video game industry. That's what I'm going to try to convince you of here. I think it's fair to say they're mostly people who had the unquestioned assumption that they'd make money out of it, right? That there'd be that they wouldn't lose money. Well, we're not going to go broke performing William Shakespeare. When you invest in a gold mine, you can lose money. You could make money. You could become very wealthy. You could lose all your money. Like all the investment it's a total failure. It's a total disaster. That happens with gold mining. Okay, well, there's a risk and reward in business. You think of publishing books. You think of performing Shakespeare, right? And until recently, you could also think of video games this way. These are the creative arts where there's not a lot of money to be made, but the assumption was there's also not a lot of money to be lost. So what motivates people to write a book? It's not the same thing that motivates them to go into gold mining. You want to grab the book on gold mining, babe? You still got it there on the shelf? Yeah. Good. In terms of what I have on my mind, some of you will see this cover and you'll know right away the historical episode I'm alluding to. And some of you have no idea. There's a real footnote in history for you there. Anyway, Brie-X. All right. Thanks, babe. Just a coincidence. We happen to have that. Yeah, I bought that as a gift from Melissa. So we'll see. We'll see when you have time to read it. We both have a pretty long reading list. Why do people write books at all? And why do people come together to mount Shakespeare? And I would say increasingly, why do people put their money together to make video games? Like we talk about indie dev, independently developed video games and stuff. I think if we can be honest with ourselves, there really is a fundamental impetus here to change the world. Well, some of you will be saying, This is Eisel Mazard speaking. And he has the delusion that everyone else has the same kind of noble and lofty ambitions that he does. No, I don't. No, I don't. I think that, when someone tries to become the next Woody Allen, there's a comparison. Okay. So you have a guy who's not terribly handsome, who wants to do a bunch of comedies about a self-pitying middle-aged white man and his sex life and his sense of self-confidence and his ego and his psychology. The person who wants to be the next Woody Allen, in their own strange, subtle way, they're trying to change the world, right? They think, hey, there are millions of other self-pitying middle-aged white men who are unhappy with their sex lives or just divorced their third wife and are looking at their fourth wife, whatever. There are men who are going through the same things this book is going to be about, and this book is going to mean so much to them. And if you adapt that book and turn it into a Broadway play, same hypothesis, right? If you make it into a movie, the book is a hit, and now you're going to make a Hollywood movie of it. This is the definitive statement for self-pitying middle-aged white men in our time. And this stuff, of course, it's so much more blatant when the people we're talking about are neither white nor male nor middle-aged, right? I see this all the time now. Mainstream media, whether it's book publishing, movies, or what have you. Like, okay, this is a story about a Pakistani immigrant family and a teenage girl in that Pakistani immigrant family who's coming of age, of her quest for acceptance and her feeling of rebellion against her family. This is going to be, again, probably starts as a novel. This is going to be the story for Pakistani immigrant teenagers in America. Why are they doing this? Do they think they're going to get rich? Do they think they're going to make $1 million out of a story about a self-pitying teenage Pakistani immigrant? No, they really think they're going to change the world. They're going to provide this kind of locus, even if it's just for, as I say, something completely emotive and emotional and self-indulgent. Like they're not fighting a revolution. They're not creating a new government. There is this fundamental impetus to change the world and to leave your mark on it, right? That you are going to be the next Woody Allen. Right? But exactly what I want to talk about in this video is the extent to which there never can be another Woody Allen, the extent to which the publishing industry, as we understand it, is ending. And I think in close parallel, the video game industry is ending. Now, what's happening in video games, it's easier to visualize than what's happening in books. It's one of the reasons I want to bring it in here as a contrast or a parallelism or what have you. PlayStation 5, Nintendo Switch. Have you seen the price just to buy a new video game for the Nintendo Switch? Here in Canada, they're not all exactly the same. It would be reasonable to say that one video game for the Nintendo Switch will cost you about $80. 80. That's just software. It's not getting into the cost of hardware, so on and so forth. Now, if you think of a pie chart, there are a certain number of people in the world spending money on video games at any time. And what I'm about to describe is a pattern that actually already existed in the 1980s. But it's become much, much more important since the year 2000. It's a much more important skew, much more powerful effect in distorting the market. So this might sound crazy to you, but back in the 1980s, this was first discovered by Atari. The Atari company found that even when the whole world had moved on to the Sega Genesis, to the 16-bit consoles, Atari could still make money selling and reselling their incredibly primitive games from the 8-bit era at a lower price and basically at a higher quality of video fidelity. So there already were people. There were some people. When you think about the pie chart, right? We think about the pie chart for 1992. There were a whole lot of people, and all their enthusiasm and all their money was going into the Sega Genesis, the new 16-bit consoles. But there were some people on that pie chart. They added up to millions of dollars. That's why Atari was launching these new consoles and so on. There were some people on that chart who said, no, they would rather buy or rebuy, purchase again, the old games from the earlier generation, right, that were now available for like $5. Like they were so much cheaper than the leading edge games. So that pattern already existed. Now, there's a big difference. Atari 2600, you can't even see a human face. There are no facial expressions in these games. These really, really low quality video output games. How about music? Have you ever heard a greatest hits list, the best music from the Atari 2600, even the Atari 1700? There's either no music or the music is indescribably horrible. Whereas Sega Genesis has great music. There's this really steep difference. But already at that point, there were people interested in buying the older games for new consoles to play with a new screen, new hardware, better quality in this sense. But obviously, it's the same software. It's the same game. Already in the 1990s, right? The history of video games was snuffing out, to some extent, the creative potential of the future. But the proportion between these two parts of the pie chart, right, that would continue to change and change and change as the decades went by, until now we're at this point when, in the year 2022, you could say to someone seriously, why would anyone buy a PlayStation 5? When you can just go on playing games from the PlayStation 2 at a lower and lower price and at a higher and higher quality of video output, of graphical fidelity, however you want to think of it, however you want to put it. Why? Why would anyone do that? And no, I'm not saying there's no difference in the graphics between PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 5. There's a difference. But if you take a PlayStation 2 game and then you play it on today's hardware, right? This is also true with the arcade games from that era. If you take Virtua Fighter 2, the arcade version, not the home console version, and then you play it on an emulator on today's hardware, right? I know you have to compare that to PlayStation 5. And again, I'm not saying there's no difference, but this is nothing like the difference between the Atari 2600 and the Sega Genesis, right? More and more people, and cost is a factor here. Economics is a factor. And fame is a factor, right? The fact that the games made in that era, any era, I mean, the fact that Pac-Man is still famous today and has this brand name recognition. Everyone knows Pac-Man. People are willing to spend money to buy Pac-Man because they know what they're going to get, right? How does a totally new game made by a no-name developer, a nothing studio, by someone you've never heard of before, a game you've never heard of, made by a person you've never heard of, how does that compete with Pac-Man? How does that compete with Tetris? Now, again, I think this discourse is out in the open in the world of video games. I think we've avoided thinking about it in book publishing. We've avoided thinking about it in the other creative arts, whether you think that is books, theater, life, the mind, intellect, whatever you want to say. I think we've avoided thinking about it because it's profoundly disturbing in its implications. What we would like to believe is that the PlayStation 2 was creating a positive opportunity for there to be something new and better and positive and innovative afterwards. Like, it's thanks to the PlayStation 2 that we have the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 5. We have this idiom in English that one is paving the way for the other. And it's very disturbing to think instead that the success of the PlayStation 2 was actually eroding the basis for any possible innovation in video games as an art form or video games as a literature to come thereafter. That actually, it's not that PlayStation 2 was paving the way for the success of the PlayStation 5. PlayStation 2 was creating a situation where how do you justify spending $80 for a new video game on a very expensive console when you could play PlayStation 2 games for the rest of your life and never exhaust that library? You see what I'm hinting at here with books? See what I'm hitting? Now, again, there's a footnote here that's of some significance. Some people are interested in things that are new just because they're new. Some. It's easy to overstate that in your mind. And a huge proportion of what people call new software is in fact retro. Okay? Nintendo makes new Mario games. Are they really new? Namco makes new Pac-Man games. Are they really new? Even Sony and Microsoft and so on. The extent to which they are recycling, they're creating derivative works. That's the legal term. They're creating sequels and reinventing. The extent to which they're leaning on that memory of the past, right? I think that indicates further the peril that we're talking about here. You can go and print a new edition of William Shakespeare's plays. You can print a new book of this. It's partly new, right? But in the sense, we don't say this about books. It's retro, right? It's a recycling of something from the past. Now, one of the reasons I want to talk about this video is that I have never heard anyone discuss it under any heading, not in terms of nonfiction, fiction, not in terms of, say, popular mass market writing, like science fiction novels, nor in terms of academic literature, history, serious and important nonfiction. I've never heard any discussion of this whatsoever. I've never seen it in any article. I'm not just saying YouTube videos or podcasts or something. This is a huge, major question for us to ask ourselves as individual creative artists, and in looking at the future of the industry and how any of us are going to write anything, how any of us are going to reach an audience in the world as technology and economics change, and that human aspiration to change the world very much, remains the same. But there's one concept I want to bring in at this point that's talked about maybe a little too often. It's really familiar within the discipline of economics. And this is the idea that the present value of a product, the present value of an investment, the present value of an item or thing is partly derived from its perceived value in the future. Right? So what is the value of a car? If you're going to buy a brand new car, part of its value, is your assumption that in future you'll be able to sell it secondhand and recoup some of the value. Now, that may be a small part with buying a car. You may buy a car and think, okay, you're going to buy this car you're going to drive it around for 5 years. You're going to get 5 years worth of value out of it. And then there's some money you're going to get back when you sell it. But still, even though that's, a small piece of the pie with your decision-making process to buy this car rather than that car, if someone says to you, you're looking at two cars that are comparable, you say, no, don't buy that car, buy this one because it has a higher resale value. When you sell it secondhand, you'll get more money back. Because now you've got a decision. Which car is worth more? Like the price may be the same, but the resale value for one car has been a huge factor in the housing market. People buy a house. Yeah, they buy it to live in it, but they don't buy it as a disposable good. In that case, it could be 100% your decision. The single most important factor may be the projected value of that house in future. But this comes down to and involves purchases like jewelry. People do not buy gold necklaces as an investment. They do not buy gold as an investment in the sense of investing in gold in the stock market. But nevertheless, the reason why gold has this tremendous cultural value in every society on earth, there are no exceptions. In India, in China, in Europe, right? This transcends culture. It's not that everyone finds gold so much more beautiful than copper. Burnished copper can be every bit as beautiful as gold, but copper can never have the resale value. Is that when you are buying necklaces, earrings, sorry, I don't know that much about jewelry, bracelets, right? That some part of the money you are investing, so to speak, in buying that gold can be recovered in future, even if you melt the gold down and just sell it as a commodity. Okay? Now, the implications of this for video games are more obvious and more easy to see than they are for books. If we lived in a world where Pac-Man was created as a plastic cartridge just once, and then you could never buy it again, think about how valuable those cartridges would be. Like, what if Pac-Man was only manufactured in the 8-bit era for 8-bit systems, and then never again? There was no other way you could get Pac-Man. And we can step this up a level because, as you probably know, the home versions, the console versions, are much more simplistic. They're much more dissatisfactory compared to the arcade version. What would the value be of a Pac-Man arcade system, a Pac-Man PCB, or a whole arcade cabinet? How much would people be paying for those if that was today the only way you could ever play arcade quality Pac-Man? Right? These things would be worth enormous amounts of money. And by the way, when they were first made, they cost enormous amounts of money. So you can look up how much did a pizza restaurant have to pay to buy an original Pac-Man arcade cabinet. They were incredibly expensive. And businesses made that purchase with a financial forecast of how much they'd earn back in quarters over 10 years of having that stand there and people coming in and playing the game again and again, paying 25 cents again and again. And let me tell you something, 25 cents was worth a lot more money back then. You have to calculate inflation here. People paid a huge amount for the machine, and the machines generated a huge amount of revenue. That was the original situation, right? But the resale value, right, with old video game hardware, with old hardware and software and so on, right? Is this something like gold? Or is this something where now people would say, what are you, crazy? Why would you pay thousands of dollars for Pac-Man? You can get it in so many formats, in so many different ways, for free, or basically for the cost of shipping and handling. When this is dropped down to a value of, like, it's maybe $5, and most of that's going into the cost of putting it into a box and sending it to you in the mail, depending on. But if you get it as a download, it may be nothing, or maybe $1.25. Like, this has come as close to being free as possible. People don't want to think through the implications of this for book writing, for authorship, and for book publishing. The implications are disturbing. It's upsetting to really think it through. So the book publishing industry did not change that much in the whole of the 20th century. I can't, because of the rise of the internet, I cannot describe the 20th century for our purposes here as 1901 to 2001. But I can say between 1880 and 1980 of a nice clean century. Frankly, we could say 1890 to 1990 also. Now, the whole world changed so much between 1880 and 1980, but the book publishing industry didn't. Science fiction houses used to publish series of books with numbers on the spine. So the vast majority of people buying the vast majority of these books, they didn't know the author. Like, the author wasn't famous yet, right? They didn't recognize the title. The title wasn't famous yet, and maybe it never would be famous. Oh, here's a book by some guy. If you guys know, these books are still collectible because of the quality of the paintings on the cover. They'd pay an artist to give you this evocative, beautiful image, normally of a woman in a bikini, and there's a space alien, and there's a rocket ship, and maybe there's a hero holding a ray gun shooting. You didn't know. Who is the author? What? And the title isn't famous. The name of the author isn't famous, right? But it was a known science fiction publisher. It was part of a series. So this is number 24, number 98. You could put it on your bookshelf in a series. You know, in a sense, the editorial team behind it. But here's the other thing that now has disappeared forever. If you buy the first edition of a book in that whole period of history, from 1880 to 1980, during that century, the first edition of a book will not lose its value. It's not an investment like the stock market. You're not going to plan for your retirement by amassing a huge library of science fiction books. But if you bought the first edition of any one of those books for $5, you could be completely confident that 50 years later, it will be worth more than $5. Maybe not much more. Maybe it's worth $10 or $20, right? But that it would not become worthless, that its value would not tarnish, it would not rust, it would not wither away. If you just kept this book in decent condition on a shelf, it was going to be worth money 50 years from now. Break it down real quick. Any book, talking about pulp fiction here, mainstream books and books nobody's ever heard of. The vast majority of science fiction authors, their book was never made into a movie. There are two possibilities with every book in that science fiction series. And some of you may know people who do this kind of collecting of books, or we got some, shout out to Generation X Gamer. Yeah, I'll come back to that. How much money are you willing to put into Pac-Man in 2022, and what is it worth given this economic factor I'm discussing here, right? Okay. So again, I'm not saying to you here that book collecting was ever a way to set up your retirement fund. Nobody ever said they don't need to save for retirement and don't need to save up to put their kids through college because they own science fiction books. But it profoundly influences consumer behavior to know if you buy this book today for $5, it's going to be worth at least $5 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Profoundly influences consumer behavior. It profoundly influences the publisher's behavior, and it profoundly influences the artist's behavior, the author's behavior, the creative people's behavior who make these things, right? And the world changes when the assumption is any book today that comes out for $40, not the usual price for a book comes out at $40. If your assumption is just a few months from now, you can get it for $5, and just a few months after that or years from now, you will be able to get it entirely for free as a download from an internet, or just for the cost of shipping and handling, whatever that might be. Like maybe it's going to cost you $2, $3, but as close to zero as possible. That is what its value is going to sink to in the future. Okay, that is going to influence profoundly the number of people who pay $40 in the first month the book comes out. That's going to influence the number of books the publisher puts out, and that's going to influence the number of people writing books thinking they can make a living that way. Video games are easier to visualize, right? Like I think in video games, people aren't in denial about this. Like, look, guys, right now on Steam, I can use an example: the Steam shop, the Nintendo Switch shop, any of these shops, any of these e-shops in the world, right? Okay, look at how many indie developed games are 80% off on Steam today. There's another website, Humble Bundle. It's another one of these things. Look at how many games, and they could be games from 2 years ago. It doesn't have to be 20 years ago. They could be from the PlayStation 2 era, but they could be from 6 months ago. Like quite soon, they have this, it's like a hardcover versus softcover thing in publishing. There's this brief period where they try to tell you this game is worth $80 or $40, like a big price. And then they drop to being as close to zero as they possibly can be. And again, sometimes it's like the cost of paper is involved, the cost of the box, the cost of shipping you in the mail. If you buy secondhand video games today, that's like, we bought a whole bunch of video games. I bought Pac-Man for under $5, but it still cost me a few dollars because it was sent to me in the mail. Like I bought some copies of Pac-Man. It's not even the cost of manufacturing anymore. It's just the cost of someone sending it to you from a warehouse. There's some cost. If you know in advance that every single video game that comes up is not going to have a regression to the mean this way, its value is going to disintegrate. It's going to tarnish. The price is going to come down, not by 50%, by 80%, by 90%. Its value is going to disappear, and not 20 years from now, like next month. Okay, how does the industry work? Now, I have an answer to that question. I don't think the industry is going to end. I don't think it's going to disappear. I think the horror that people have to deal with in the video game industry is the extent to which this is becoming more like a nonprofit area of the arts, of the creative arts. That this is becoming more like what the opera is today, what theater is today, where people get involved, people put on these plays with no real expectation of making money, or where it's not about the money for everyone involved. Okay, so again, to be clear, I'm not saying in the past people bought books in order to get rich. We're not buying books in order to get rich. I'm not even saying people wrote books or published books in order to get rich, although some did. There was 100 years ago, there was a lot of money to be made in the publishing industry. Today, there's none. It's a change, right? But I'm saying there's a really fundamental economic assumption here that has changed, and it's changed forever, okay? And it's not as simple as saying that it's produced by scarcity. Like it's not just because of scarcity. This is quite complex culturally and in terms of use as an economic concept here. Like how are you actually going to be able to read the book? How are you actually going to play the video game? So on and so forth. It's more complex than that. Do you want to jump in, babe? Guys, if you have anything intelligent to say in the comments, I will read and pay attention to your comments and questions. If you don't have anything intelligent to say, don't feel pressured by me to say. This video is going to end up on my new channel that's mentioned in the description, From Ink to Ink, where I want to talk more about book publishing, to some extent about movies and TV adaptations. Now you can't even say TV streaming adaptations, but adaptations of books into performance art, shall we say, for want of a better term. I want to talk about these things. And as you can guess from this video, I'm interested in the way in which cultural production is linked to economics. Cultural production is linked to politics, often in ways that people don't really want to let themselves think about. Okay, just finish with this image of a bookshelf with a series of science fiction books, and this would be true of many other genres of fiction too, where they just have numbered entries in a series. We know great in nonfiction. We know great series. You know the Everyman series. Do you still have that? The small version of Aristotle, the small green Aristotle. So this is another, and these are worth money today still. You know, good luck doing this again. So they're a cute collectible. This is a numbered series from Everyman Editions. Everyman Editions, the Loeb Editions. That's nonfiction. That's Aristotle, right? And people want to own the whole set. So I'm just going to show the frontispiece. We don't get a nice frontispiece here. Okay. Oh, well, there you go. A treatise on government or the politics of Aristotle. So people want to have a whole bookshelf with a matching set of these. They're collectible. And again, they were a store for 100 years. This was a reliable store of value, right? And so scarcity isn't the only factor, but scarcity is one of them. I'll iterate as follows. If someone publishes a new science fiction book by a completely unknown author, so the author isn't famous and the title isn't famous, it's just new. Maybe it's great, maybe it's terrible, most likely it's mediocre. This is a new book. It has, in that sense, it has no reputational value or something, right? Unlike Nintendo publishing a new game with Mario in the title. You know what I mean? There's a reputation they're drawing on in the past there, right? It's a new Mario game, but there's a sense in which it's not new at all, right? Or indeed, if we publish Aristotle again today, we're leaning on Aristotle's reputation, a reputation built up over hundreds of years with all kinds of publishers and translators working hard and university professors creating and sustaining that reputation. But if you bought a book anytime during this strange century, 1880 to 1980, totally unknown science fiction author, totally unknown title, right? You could be certain it would retain its value or that it would increase in value because there are really only two possibilities. One, the book is a flop, and therefore the first edition is the only edition. So therefore you have scarcity, right? That's simple, economically and conceptually. So if anyone wants to read this book, nobody has foreseen that the internet is going to happen. So the book is a flop, therefore it's rare. Like at the time of its publication, it's rare. It never gets reprinted. It never gets republished. The author dies in obscurity, right? No, this happened to millions of people. Okay, the book it could be extremely valuable with time. It could double. Well, okay, whatever. It could 10x. Could increase 10. You bought it for $5. Now it's worth $50. Again, you're not gonna put your kids through college this way. But this becomes a valuable book because the first edition is the only edition, and the assumption before the internet is that is the only way to read the book is to get a copy of the book. So there's this aftermarket that goes on forever and ever. Right? Now, again, I said to you hypothetically, what if this happened with Pac-Man? What if the only way to play arcade Pac-Man was to get an arcade PCB, to get an original Pac-Man cabinet? Again, you can take the circuit out and put it in use a new screen. You can use a new joystick, but where the actual circuitry had to be unspeakably valuable. These would be incredibly rare. And not just, again, it's not just rarity. It's not just scarcity, right? There will be people who want to have that experience. And again, today, if you ask someone, you talk about spending thousands of dollars in an arcade Pac-Man game, and say, what are you, crazy? You can play it on your mobile phone. You can play it on a wristwatch. You can play it on a laptop computer. You can play it on your toaster. Like any hardware, if your toaster has an LCD screen, you can play it on your fridge. Go through. What do you mean? Like Pac-Man, even if it's not legal, because the company who owns the rights, they may be trying to create artificial scarcity, right? Why can't you play Pac-Man on your PlayStation 2? You can make it a list of every form of hardware. Imagine, okay, nobody wanted to think about what this would do in the world of books, right? I read, it should be a priceless book. I read the autobiography of Napoleon's younger brother. That's a rare book. And I have a friend, so Oliver, ODS, he says he managed to find volume 2. And I think he found it in French, not in English. Volume 2, I think it doesn't exist in English. You know how I read that book? I downloaded it for free as a PDF. This is a rare, historically important book. I didn't pay $1. I mean, you can calculate the cost of my computer and my internet subscription. It's not truly zero cost, but you're coming down to almost zero cost. We didn't want to think about the corrosive effect on creativity, on innovation. I mean, I'm interested in the writer. I'm not just interested in the death of the book publishing industry. I'm interested in how we can live, how we survive as writers once the industry has died. The industry isn't paying advances anymore. Okay, that's over, and the industry, nobody expects to be able to make money out of publishing anything. And it's partly for this reason, like the video game industry, right? Well, yeah, you can sell this video game today for $50, but everyone buying it knows it will be available for $5 soon enough. And when you talk about download-based services like Steam, like a Nintendo eShop, these things where you don't own anything physically real for this game, right? You're not even getting a similar product for $5. You're getting exactly the same product, exactly the same experience. Like it's not even the difference between a paper book and reading a book on your mobile phone or as a PDF on Kindle as an option, where there's no difference at all. It's the same website, expecting some people to pay $50 for the exact same product that some people will pay $5 for, right? Think about how that changes your perception as a consumer and your behavior as a consumer. If you have a kid, let's say you have an 11-year-old kid who's saying, mommy, I want to buy this video game. Mommy has to explain to the kid, look, they're asking for $50 for this video game, but I know I can get it for you for $5 just a few months from now. Maximum 2 years from now, she can say to the kid if she's being honest. Maybe 6 months from now, maybe 2 years. You're a little kid. 6 months seems like a long time. What do you mean 6 months? That's the tension you've got there. With books, right? In a sense, it's even more extreme because we're now in a situation where anyone in the right mind will say, look, conventional book publishing is obsolete. Just jump straight to the 80% off. Like, why don't you just put it out for the first place? It was $1 per download. Why even do any of this crap? Why even do any of this rigmarole in the middle? Why put out a hardcover? Why put out a soft cover? Jump to Kindle distribution, jump to electronic only distribution for that minimum price, right? So, all right, I digressed slightly from saying, when you're talking about the stack of science fiction books, any period, 1930s, 1960s, people still do clearly say, okay, there are two possibilities. One, the book is a flop. The first edition is the only edition. And then it's very simple to understand why that's worth money, or why it was right up to the invention of the internet, right? Now the internet exists. Who cares? What's this book worth? You can get it anywhere. You can get it for the price of a download. And this is also an interesting factor. The internet also changed the world just by making it possible, however scarce it is, right? The type of scarcity was different before the internet. Because if you're looking for this book, if you want to buy it, you go into a bookstore that's charging $100. Before the internet, you have to pay $100. When are you ever going to see this book again? There's a rare book. You're walking from bookstore to bookstore and checking if they have the book. You happen to go into a bookstore that has the book. It's $100. You can ask the person, look, could you hold this for me? You can then walk and check 4 other bookstores, see what they're charging, or see if they have a copy at all. Nobody else has it. You have to pay $100. When the whole world is connected by the internet, somebody somewhere has a copy of that book they'll sell you for $50. Most likely someone somewhere has a copy they'll sell you for $5. Right? So just the reality of Amazon.com, the reality of eBay, even if we couldn't instantly and at zero cost reproduce an infinite number of copies of books and share them, right? That profoundly impacts, as I say, book production as well as book consumption. And of course, this impacts video games, right? Like, I mean, again, when you talk about Pac-Man as a plastic cartridge, right? If I'm not buying it as a download, I'm buying it as a physically real item. Somebody somewhere wants to sell this for $5. Like, and you can construe an argument that it's really worth much more. Well, guess what? The internet connected us all in this way. I can go on Facebook Marketplace. I can go on Amazon. I can go on doesn't matter, but some secondhand reselling website. And guess what? Somebody's willing to sell $5. Someone's basically saying, like, I want to get rid of this crap. Same with books. Somebody's uncle dies. They inherit their uncle's book collection. The science fiction books don't matter to them. Well, uncle's dead now. Let's put these up on the internet for basically the cost of shipping and handling. Let's get rid of this, just instead of putting it in a landfill. That's what video games are to enough people. Maybe it's worth more to you sentimentally or whatever. You're a collector. You want to own every version of Pac-Man or something. You have a collection like this, but it's worth more than $5 to you, not the person selling it, right? And then what is the effect on a creative, innovative young person today who wants to make the next Pac-Man, who wants to make a new Pac-Man? And he isn't a famous person. He doesn't have a famous name, right? He's not Shigeru Miyamoto or whatever. Doesn't have a famous name. And he can't use the name Pac-Man. Like, this game also can't have a famous name. He can't call his game Super Mario. He can't call it Pac-Man. There's no built-in audience. There's no reputational value. Right, guys, creative writers, that's the position we're all in. You want to write your story about your life or your science fiction tale, whatever it is you've thought. You want to write your memoir, you want to write fiction, you want to even write history. You think you have something really valuable to say about Napoleon Bonaparte, about the history of Napoleon Bonaparte, and that you have an angle and you have an opinion that nobody's ever published before, and it really matters. How many people are going to buy the book? Because you are competing with every book that ever has been published about Napoleon Bonaparte before you, and they are all cheaper than your book. You're selling your book for $50. Those other books are available for $5, or if people are willing to put up with digital download only, available for free. Video games, exactly the same problem, exactly the same pattern. You say, hey, I have this brilliant, wonderful new idea for a Mario style game, a platform game, a Sonic the Hedgehog style game, that style of game. And you're so confident in yourself, you have something really valuable, really original. Okay, well, guess what? You have to compete with the accumulated history of every single Mario style game, every single Sonic the Hedgehog style game. And all of those games are available for $5 or zero, or like as close to zero as the market will bear, as the distribution system, can render to you. So is your game that much better that you, as a nobody producing a no-name game, you're going to have a hit? And what are you going to sell it for? Can you even sell it for $5? Because you can't compete. You're going to sell it for $50. And what industry is going to support you? Who's going to invest the money in advance? Who's going to pay you in advance? Who's going to provide the really expensive infrastructure for development and production so that your game exists at all? Right? The same way, I hate to tell you this, an actual printing press is quite expensive. The infrastructure to produce and distribute a book is not cheap, and it's not free. Who's going to do that when they, as the producer, and all of the consumers have the knowledge in advance? 6 months from now, this is going to be worth $5. 2 years from now, it's going to be worth $0. Okay? You do not see a lot of people wearing copper jewelry because everyone knows copper rusts, copper tarnishes, copper disintegrates. You can polish it. Copper can have this wonderful, beautiful mirror-like finish. Copper can be every bit as beautiful as gold. Okay, and there's a sense in which copper can be just as valuable as gold, but it's not a store of value. You can't buy and wear copper jewelry, copper rings, copper bangles, right, with the expectation that your grandchildren will inherit them. You can't buy them with the expectation you can melt it down and sell it for its value. And frankly, how many years is copper going to last? It depends. If you have a copper wedding ring and you wash your hands and you wear it in the shower, how long does a copper wedding ring last compared to a gold wedding ring? Right? To a subtle extent that I think really matters intellectually, culturally, politically, economically, right? The whole book publishing industry went from being gold to copper, right? And nobody paid attention. Nobody cared. Nobody thought about the implications. I think the whole video game industry, at least they're talking about it. At least they're aware it's a problem. They're going from being gold to copper. Okay, so I still haven't finished my allegory, believe it or not, of the science fiction books on the shelf. So there were two possibilities. One possibility is it's a first edition, and the first edition is the only edition. It never comes out again. Again, I had to use something hypothetical. What if this happened with Pac-Man? There were a few games like that. There were a few. Henry Hatsworth. So I'll just give you guys a counter argument. Henry Hatsworth, am I getting it right, for Nintendo DS? Okay, so this is an example of a game. I've got it listed here as being worth $60. This is very rare. Today, the vast majority of games for the Nintendo DS are worth $0, and all platforms, in the whole history of video games, this stuff is now basically worth its packaging. It's worth packaging and shipping costs, right? And it's interesting because people, let's be clear here, people perceive these as collector's items with great intrinsic value, and they're not. And they're not, partly because of fungibility, replaceability, these forms of competition we're discussing. Okay, so until the year 2022, like up until today, if you wanted to play Henry Hatsworth, so what am I going to do? I'll give you guys a link. Who's even heard of Henry Hatsworth? This is now a valuable collection. Another example, the version of Gianna Sisters for the Nintendo DS. I think that'll cost you about $100. That version. Anyway, not a big deal. I don't even know this website. They're selling it for about $50. Okay, well, I don't want to endorse this website, so whatever. Okay, these are games that today you could pay $50, you could pay $100. Why? Okay. The first edition of Henry Hatsworth is the only edition. It was never published for any other platform. It was never made available for Nintendo Switch or PlayStation 4 or PlayStation Vita. It was only made to run on one system and then disappeared never again. And that system, until today, until 2022, it's changing now. It was only playable on the original hardware. The only way to play a Nintendo DS game was to actually own a physical DS. Now that's changing today. All right, right now, I believe 2022 is the first year Anne Bernick in China started putting out new portable systems where you can play a Nintendo DS game without owning any Nintendo hardware. None of your money goes to Nintendo, and where you can download and play for free the entire library of the Nintendo DS. So I have no reason to think Henry Hatsworth is going to continue going up in value. I have no reason to think that the DS version of Gianna Sisters is going up in value, right? But those were examples of something where the first edition was the only edition. It's actually scarce. There are actually these constraints. But with the progress of technology, even for those exceptions to the rule, we're not talking about Mario, we're not talking about Sonic, we're not talking about Pac-Man, something quite obscure, right? And where the first edition was the only edition, right? Even that technological progress erodes and eventually destroys their value, where it will become a situation where people say, well, what? If it's just sentimental value, why do you want to pay $50 or $100 for an original cartridge of either of these games? Anyone instantly for free can play them on any hardware. You can play it on your laptop. You can play it on your mobile phone. That's going to happen for the DS. As I say, you can either say it hasn't happened yet or it's happening right now for that system. With all these other systems, it's already happened. I've never done this, but people tell me you can do at least PlayStation 2 on my mobile phone. I have a cheap mobile phone. I was surprised as I said, no, PlayStation 2 is fine on this mobile phone. So not just PlayStation 1, but mobile phones are able to gobble up more and more, not just of the old 16-bit or 32-bit market. Mobile phones can do everything. Your laptop can do everything. It's all fungible. It's all instantly exchangeable. Okay. So when you're looking at this science fiction book, I say again, there are two possibilities. One is that the first edition is the only edition. It's actually scarce. But the other possibility is it was that rare book. It was that 1 in a million book that had a hit movie made out of it. It was that rare book that was published and republished again and again and again. It had a second edition, a third edition, a 10th edition, right? But for that century, for that period of time, 1880 to 1980, either way, you could be certain 50 years from now, the first edition of this book is going to be worth more than its cover price today. You could buy it for $5, completely certain. Hey, there are two possibilities. It's a flop, the first edition is the only edition, then it's valuable due to scarcity. Or two, it's a hit, and then the first edition is valuable because of fame. Like, Lord of the Rings, as an example. Of course, any corner store, you can buy Lord of the Rings anywhere. Who can count the 200th edition of Lord of the Rings, right? It's ubiquitous. But because of its fame, people want to own the first edition, so it becomes valuable also, right? Now, again, this happened also with medium-sized success stories in science fiction. Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. The first edition is worth something. That's not a huge success. It's not like Star Trek, but the first edition is worth something, even though it's been reprinted again and again. Obviously, Dune. We saw that recently. Went to a bookstore. How many copies of Dune did the bookstore have for sale? It's crazy. Of course, you can get anywhere. You can get it for $5 scam-free, then because of the fame. All right. So this is what I was saying is the one aspect that is talked about. The extent to which the value of an item, the value of an investment, the value of a product partially derives from our perception of its future value. So, look, I want to say this. I don't know if he's still here in the audience. We've got here called Generation X in the audience. He is an optimist about Bitcoin, about cryptocurrency. So another example, NFTs. If you don't know what this stuff is, don't Google it. You don't want to know. Don't let it ruin your life. Okay. What is the value of an NFT today? What portion of the value of that investment is based on its perceived or assumed future value, right? The value of Bitcoin has almost zero use value, right? Almost zero. But you have a perception or an assumption that it's going to be worth more money in the future. All right. What percentage of its value today is that assumption about its future value, right? And what if that's wrong? Now, there are a whole lot of reasons why it should be wrong, and my conviction is that it is wrong. I think, I'm a Bitcoin critic, whatever I want to say. You know, to say I'm a skeptic would be false, because it's not that I'm a skeptic. I'm actually opposed to it, including morally, frankly. I'm a Bitcoin debunker, put it that way. I'm really hostile to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, right? But now you're in a situation where its current value is based on its perceived future value. And a lot of things in this life, a lot of books especially, right? Oh, if you don't buy this now for $100, this is going to be the only way to play this game. This is going to be the only way to read this book. There's no other way to. What happens when that disappears? We're living through it right now. We're living through the death of scarcity in intellectual property, the death of scarcity in the publishing industry, the death of scarcity in everything else. And again, we want to believe instinctually that the success of one generation paves the way for the success of the next. Like, it's thanks to the success of the Sega Master System that we have the success of the Sega Genesis. And then it's thanks to the success of the Sega Genesis that we have the success of the Sega Saturn. The thanks to PlayStation 2 that we have PlayStation 3, right? And I'm not saying that's completely insane. Like, there's a sense in which that's true. The Sega company was only able to make the Sega Genesis because they were only able to get the investment to do that because they had some proven success with earlier video game consoles. To my knowledge, if you look into who actually were the investors that made the Sega Genesis possible, it might be a very interesting story, like who the actual people were who sat down and had a board meeting, said, okay, we're going to each put in $10 million to make this book. It's a lot of money, right? I described to you before, the theater. We want to put on a production of Cats in Tallahassee, Florida. Okay, we're going to do a stage play of Cats. You've got to bring together some really rich people in a room. You've got to have a board meeting and say, look, guys, here are the plans. Here are the projected costs. Here are the projected revenues. You got to really stand. You got to do a pitch meeting, and then they've got to put their money together. And it's on a smaller scale. That's what happens in the publishing industry too. You want to have a hit book. People are going to have to invest money. People have to make executive decisions about making the book. And again, what happens? What happens when the assumed future value of this is zero or is close to zero? Just a few months hence. Okay, we want to think about each stage of development as paving the way forward, as positively creating the basis for the success of the next stage of development, creating the platform for the next stage of development, right? But what if the opposite is true to an even greater extent, right? What if there can't be another Sonic the Hedgehog because in a very real sense, any new innovation is overshadowed by that past innovation, right? And that past success. And I don't just mean the reputation and fame that it's achieved, although that's an important factor. How good is your new video game when it has to compete with the excellence of every single video game that's ever existed in the past, all of which are competing for the limited attention span of your audience? The ultimate constraint is time, right? How many hours do you have to play video games? And now, why would you pay $80? So expensive, these new games, but $80, $50 is a cheap game, a new game. Why would you do that when you can play anything from the whole library of video games of the past? Again, including even things that came out 6 months ago, 2 years ago. Doesn't have to be retro in that sense. The discounts on a game that came out 2 years ago, 80% off, 90% off, download now on the eShop, whatever, right? When you have to compete with not just Sonic the Hedgehog, but the library, the combined brilliance, the combined excellence of every video game ever made in the past, all right? Every new book that comes out today has to compete with William Shakespeare. Every new detective novel has to compete with Agatha Christie, who everyone want to say is the Shakespeare of detective novels. You know what I'm saying? You have to compete with Hercule Poirot, so on and so forth, right? And from an investment standpoint, right, how can we justify paying you in advance when we are certain your new book is going to make less money than if we just reprint Shakespeare, if we reprint Agatha Christie? The new innovation for the producers is worth less money and much less reliable money than just recycling and exploiting the greatest hits from the past again and again. That's the producer's perspective. Then from the consumer's perspective, they're saying, why should I buy your book for $40? I can read any book from the whole history of English literature for $0 or just for the cost of shipping it, for pennies or maybe for $5. Your detective novel has to compete for my time, my interest, and my money, not just with William Shakespeare, not just with Agatha Christie, but with the combined excellence of everything your culture has accomplished in the past. Okay. This is a kind of chronological competition. I think nobody talks about and nobody thinks about. And it takes away from us this delusion of, oh, isn't it great? Agatha Christie created this genre of books that now I get to succeed in. She paved the way. She created this platform. Again, PlayStation 2 created the platform for PlayStation 5. Well, yeah, that's partly true. But the success of Agatha Christie, the economic success of authors in the past, can, in a very material and palpable sense, make it impossible for you to succeed as an author today. The innovation that took place in the past can snuff out and preclude innovation in present. So I'm going to use an image here from the theater because I think it's easier to visualize. I mean, some of these you try to make them palpable, so we're not just dealing with abstractions on a chalkboard. Okay, let's say I'm completely convinced that I have the most brilliant idea for a new play, a new drama about ancient Rome, about the rise and fall of Julius Caesar. I'm going to call it The Death of Caesar. And I'm just so confident. And again, this could be a person who's confident they're going to make a video game that's better than Sonic the Hedgehog. Well, how much better? It's so much better that people won't play the original Sonic Hedgehog for free. They're going to pay $50 for your new version of Sonic the Hedgehog. Really? It's going to be that good? Is that even possible? And if you're asking me to invest, you want me to invest $1 million to take that gamble? Really? See? If you sit down with the board of directors, you gather together a bunch of wealthy people in Tallahassee, Florida. Let's just say, okay, so look, I'm going to put on Julius Caesar. It's a new Julius Caesar written by a nobody. It's a no-name Julius Caesar. It's new. The writer isn't famous. The board of directors, if they're really going to be honest with you, they will sit there and say, I'm sorry, economically, this doesn't make sense. We will make more money. We'll have more people sitting in the seats. We'll have a bigger audience if instead we put on William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. That's what the audience exists for. That's what the market demand exists for. And if you don't believe me, just think it through. What if the investors are so generous and say, hey, how about we do both? How about we have 2 theaters in Tallahassee simultaneously perform this play, this drama about Julius Caesar? Okay. And one of them, the posters say William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. And the other one says Julius Caesar, a new play by Eisel Mazard, by some guy you've never heard of before. No name writer. Now look, the new play, it can be better. It can be. I'm not going to boast here. I think I feel completely confident I could write a better play about Julius Caesar than William Shakespeare did. In what sense better? For one thing, I could write a play that's more relevant to the politics of the 21st century. Right? I can write about Julius Caesar in a way that's meaningful to people today. That was not Shakespeare's intent. Different historical context. I can list off for you a whole bunch of ways in which I can write a better Julius Caesar. How about just the comprehensibility of the script for the audience? There's a lot of vocabulary there in Shakespeare that the audience really struggles with. I want to reach the people of Tallahassee, Florida in the 21st century. I'm going to write about it in a way that they can relate to, whatever. There are a whole bunch of ways in which I can say to you, I'm 100% confident I can write a better play than Shakespeare. We can put on a better play than Shakespeare, right? But economically, I can't compete. All right. The creativity, the brilliance, the innovation of the present cannot compete with the innovation, the brilliance, the creativity of the past. The success of William Shakespeare is actually snuffing out the possibility of anyone, myself included, writing an original hit play about the tragic death of Julius Caesar. And you could just visualize it. We have 2 different theaters in the same city producing these 2 different plays. people have heard of Shakespeare. It's partly reputational value, right? It's partly the brand name that can go on for centuries, that can go on forever, right? Oh, Shakespeare. Isaac Asimov, Oh, there's a new movie being made about an old Isaac Asimov novel. What chance do you have of writing a science fiction book today that's going to rise to that level of reputation and going to be adapted to a movie? And again, even if you do both, what if the investors are really generous? They say, okay, well, look, we're going to do both. We're going to do Isaac Asimov's movie about robots. And you know what, kid? You new no-name kid, just you kid nobody saw. You also wrote an interesting script about robots. We're going to do both simultaneously. But you know what? We're going to give a $100 million budget to the Isaac Asimov movie, and you get a $10 million budget because we're completely certain more money is to be made there in the retro cinema world. We say retro video games, don't say retro cinema. There's more money in retro publishing. For the audience, they're more interested in retro reading. They can read all the greatest minds of so many centuries, right? They're not really interested in your creative potential. We're going to give them a $100 million budget because we are certain that is the movie that's going to be a hit. That's going to reach a larger audience. And this movie about robots with a title nobody's heard of before, written by a guy nobody's heard before, that is a pretty small shot of reaching a significant audience, of making a lot of money. Okay, guys. So look, from my perspective, we could wrap it up here. We're at the 1 hour mark. I've made the argument I came to make. I'm going to read and reply to your comments. Melissa already made an interesting comment from the way. So guys, if you have something intelligent to say, hit the thumbs up. You 45 people have been sitting here for 1 hour and you just couldn't make up your minds if you were going to hit thumbs up or not. I ask you, 45 people sit here for an hour. You can't hit the thumbs up button. Okay. Interesting, a bunch of people just left when I said I was going to wrap up the video, but the most interesting part of the video is still coming. Little do you suspect. So look, guys, if you're sitting on the fence, you can change your mind later. You can hit thumbs down later if you think this video turns to crap. But if you want to hit thumbs up, if you have an intelligent thing to say, I will read your comments and respond to them in just a moment. But Melissa gets first place, first dibs. First dibs. What is the etymology of the word dib? There you go. So Melissa made actually an interesting comment that I hadn't thought about before at all. Okay. Hadn't thought about it today. I think we have conversationally talked about this before. I've said in this video today, nobody gets to be William Shakespeare because we already had a Shakespeare. Like, we have this really strange sense in which the quantitative buildup of writing in the past negatively impacts, innovation, production of new writing in the present future. Okay, what about YouTube? What if the problem isn't just that there can never be another Pac-Man? There can never be another Space Invaders. Another example, there can never be another Star Wars. It's an interesting one to think about, There can never be another Dune. Okay, what if there can never be another PewDiePie? What if the opportunity, in each category, what if there can never be another Tess Begg? What if there can never, Tess Begg, she rose and fell from. What if there can never be another Nina and Randa? My point is to include here people who really weren't very talented and who didn't put any great effort into their YouTube videos and nevertheless had enormous fame and enormous success. You are competing against someone like PewDiePie, who's already established, who already exists, and you're competing against the accumulated brilliance and Shane Dawson. There's a great example. Will there be another Shane Dawson, or is that an opportunity that came once, went forever? Now, so it's just an interesting suggestion Melissa made to me. Like, oh, you could apply this analysis to YouTube also. Well, what's different about YouTube is that for the viewer, it always was free, right? It always was zero cost, or as close to zero cost as possible. And I remember when I got started on YouTube, the really kind of toxic sense of entitlement the audience had. I remember that. There was this sense of like, you work for me, like the audience talking to me like I'm their employee. And it's like, bro, you think I make $1 out of this video? It's really strange. And people were used to this kind of effusive attitude from the broadcaster. Like, oh, thank you so much for your support, guys. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. There's there's really weird set of assumptions built in. So if you want to say something, jump in. But I was going to say YouTube is different because from day one, it was presumed to be zero cost by the audience. The audience never thought they'd pay an admission fee. They never thought they'd pay to watch your movie or watch your monologue or whatever it is you do. And it was always presumed to have a future value of zero. This is something people presume would be free to download on the internet now. It'd be free to download forever, you know. And there was nobody thought of collecting or even owning, YouTube videos. Now, in reality, some of it has become scarce. A lot of YouTube channels were deleted and disappeared, and a lot of people wished they had downloaded it and saved it on a hard drive. And there's a real question of, would that be worth money? If you had the archives of what are otherwise deleted and disappeared YouTubers, what is that worth? Because there you have real scarcity. But this was the difference is there's no 1880 to 1980 period. This is instead something that from the beginning had those assumptions baked in. But nevertheless, remember what Melissa said, I thought was very interesting. There's a lot of truth to it. There's nevertheless this sense in which success on YouTube now is somehow eroded or undermined or destroyed by success in the past. And people talk about that in their own way. They talk about early adopters having advantages and then the opportunities disappearing. There's a kind of language we have to talk about these things. But yeah, reaching 5,000 views per video, that seemed so effortless, so easy, so attainable in, say, 2014. And it's really hard today. It's really unlikely today. And, I guess my hesitation here is just to say, to what extent is that because whatever you're doing has been done before and it's already available? So for some genres of videos, that's the case. For some genres of videos, it's very close to what I'm saying about books. So I'll give you an example of a hit video on my channel. I made a video about how to get a good grade on the intelligence test for the Canadian Army, based on my own experience when I applied for and joined the Canadian Army. Spoilers, didn't last long. I was volunteering to go fight against ISIS in the war. Didn't happen for purely bureaucratic paper reasons, and it turned out the war against ISIS didn't last that long. But I signed up to fight, guys. Anyway, so I made a video. It's an instructional video about how to study for and write and do well on that intelligence test. And it has a huge number of views. I'm sorry, I could check, but it's a huge number of views. I believe at that time that was the only YouTube video on that topic. And it might have been the only video on the whole of the internet. Like there was nowhere else you could go. So if anyone put into Google, oh, how do I study for the intelligence test for the Army? How do I do this? Now, again, it's not that big a market. This is Canada. It would have more views if it was the American test or the Chinese test or something. But Canada is a small country in terms of population, a lot of empty landmass, but small in terms of population. And, there are several thousand people per year who continue clicking on and watching that video. Can you have that success again? Can you make a new video? So there we get the same pattern. Where the question is, now look, I'm not saying that video is a masterpiece. Any one of you in the audience might say, so someone just checked. They say the video is over 50,000 views now. So yeah, for my channel, that's a huge hit. And for Canada, for something that's this video is only interesting to people in Canada who are applying to join the Army, not even the people who are already in the Army. It's people who are about to go into the Army. It's a very specific audience in a small country. So I got 50,000 views. So here's my question. If you think, you can go watch that video, you think, this video is not that great. The video is just so-so. If you feel that you can make a better video on that topic, how much better is it going to be that you'll take the success away from me, that you'll displace my video from its position of fame, even if it's micro fame, that you are going to be the next Agatha Christie, so to speak. Nobody's going to click on my video anymore. They're going to click on yours. And that is in a context where watching either video costs the viewer nothing. You're not asking them to even pay $5 to buy a book or $5 to buy a video game, where there's really no, people can click on both, right? There's no reason. I think, though, it's true, there is nevertheless this hurdle to get over. Oh, there already is a video on that. There already is a successful video on that. There's already a video that's kind of known or established or famous on that. Now, I would think that would be true of many other instructional videos of that kind, Obviously, there are some other types of videos where that can never be the case. If I make a YouTube video, okay, I'm arguing against myself here. I was about to say, if I make a YouTube video about Joe Biden's latest report, which I've done. So Joe Biden publishes a report. So by definition, nobody else could have made a YouTube video about that. The report was published that day, let's say. So there only been a few hours where someone could read the report, analyze it, and then give an erudite discussion of it. So there have been things like that. There have been historical and political issues where I was either the first person or was among the first person to make YouTube video about it. Lindsey Graham being homosexual is a better topic. There was this breaking news that was only on Twitter at that point. It wasn't even in the newspapers yet. And I made a video talking about the politics of whether or not Lindsey Graham is homosexual and of people saying that he's homosexual. In the 21st century, things have certainly changed. Melissa just read an article about Ed Koch, I should say, sorry. But yeah, New York Mayor Ed Koch and the politics surrounding his homosexuality and so on. So for me, an interest, okay, you can look at that and say, well, with breaking news, with something that's really new and different, you could optimistically say, then you can compete. Then you don't have this problem of being overshadowed by the past. Even if TYT is so much worse than me, even when what I'm producing is so much better than TYT, this is a rival YouTube channel, right? 99% of the market is going to get their news from TYT instead, because TYT was here. They were the first monetized YouTube channel, it is said on the internet, so far as I know. They were the first YouTube channel to get a partnership and start getting paid by YouTube for uploading content. And I'm completely confident. Basically, I don't think there's a single political issue on which I couldn't make a better YouTube video than TYT. Maybe if I think about it, I'll think, okay, you know what? Turkey. Cenk Uygur knows more about the politics of Turkey. So look, legit, not every topic. There are some topics they know more about. I just don't care that much about the politics of Turkey. So you can argue Cenk Uygur can talk about the politics and history of Turkey better than I. Okay, with a few exceptions. There are innumerable political topics on which I'm completely certain I can make a better YouTube video than TYT. And I can make a better YouTube video than CNN, and I can make a better YouTube video than Fox News. No question. What percentage of the market goes to TYT, CNN, and Fox News? Partly just because they already exist. So yeah, mutatis mutandis, the same problem, the same pattern exists within YouTube, even when we don't have to deal with cost of distribution. We don't have to deal with the cost of collecting. There's no secondhand market. When all those other factors are taken out of it, some of the same dynamics or dynamism, some of the same problem with today's innovation, today's creativity, today's writing, today's research being undermined and eroded by that of yesteryear. It continues to be a problem. So credit to Melissa. That section of the video was inspired or suggested by her. We have a bunch of suggestions that I should make a video game about Julius Caesar using Unreal Engine 5. Right. I don't think I need to get into the details. Someone said, and I do understand why they're saying this, Nintendo DS emulators, so 2DS, 3DS, and so on, it says they can't really fully emulate what it's like to play an original DS. Okay, right. But dude, 20 years ago, we could have said that about Pac-Man too, right? Like, really, but can you really capture arcade Pac-Man? It's still an issue, right? But with the progress of time, and that's why I said this is something that's changing right now for the Nintendo DS, whereas it already changed in the past. We can contrast here directly, like within this apartment. You can contrast original Famicom, real Famicom hardware to emulation. There are differences. There's a gap, right? But the gap gets wide. And at one point, it was an insuperable gap. At one point, like as you say, it's just impossible to play DS. At one point, it was impossible to play GameCube on emulation. Each of these systems, they had their period of it being impossible. Then it goes from impossible to possible. Then it goes from possible to easy. Then it goes to being such high quality that they're indistinguishable, or where the emulation is better than the original. So especially for 3D era games, I'm sorry, but Nintendo 64, it's better emulated than original. Nintendo 64, fake is better than real. I've never done it, but PlayStation 1, people say that about it. It's very easy for me to imagine. PlayStation 1 will be better on an emulator than on original hardware. It's the crispness of the rendering and the polygons and some of the ways in which you can improve the graphics through emulation. So yeah, I don't want to get into an in-depth and detailed discussion about emulators. But again, I'm not offended that you said this, but you're not undermining my original point. Even if the original video game on original hardware is better, all right, which may be true with Nintendo DS, it may even be true with an 8-bit system like the Famicom. Really, not joking. Even with 8-bit games, original hardware may be better. Okay. But if you are comparing paying $50 to paying $5, is it that much better? And you may be comparing paying more than $50 to less than $5. If the emulated version of the game, doesn't matter if it's Nintendo DS or PlayStation 2, even if you think the emulated version is slightly worse, if you think the original is slightly better, how much of a price gap does that justify? And for how many people? Like there still is a market for original hardware, right? You want to measure how many thousand people it is, or how many thousand people want to pay $50 for that, and how many million are willing to download it for free. So again, with books, same issue. Now, sorry, I mean, for me, this is my ultimate concern. I cannot earn a living writing a new history of Napoleon Bonaparte. Nobody will pay me. I won't get a publisher's advance up front. I won't get money to do the research, like to go out and write the book, which could involve also translating resources, paying a translator to work with, going to archives. There are costs to making a book. There was a time when a writer could actually get paid in advance to do that because the publisher would be sure to make money. I can't do that for Napoleon. And if I do with my own money, I ask my mother to give me money to write a book about Napoleon. In my family, that's possible. I could ask my mother to bankroll my research into Napoleon Bonaparte. I'm tempted to do that with a more obscure figure, Governor Morris. I'm very tempted to get some money together and do a research project on Governor Morris. And there have been books already written about him, but I'd like to write a new and different and better one. I'd like to do the research on Governor Morris. But okay, if my mother gives me a couple $1,000s so I can go and live in poverty and research and write a book about Napoleon, can I get it published? Like already that's now a hurdle because no publisher thinks they can make money out of this book with Napoleon. How good is my book on Napoleon? It has to compete with every other book ever written about Napoleon, right? How much money can it earn for the publisher? How much money can it earn for me in that competitive context when all the books written in the past are available for $5 on paper or absolutely for free as a download? So it's snuffing out my ability to engage in original research and authorship. And that's even for something as mainstream as Napoleon. What if it's not as mainstream as Napoleon? What if it's Cambodia? What if it's Myanmar? Right? So there's a lot of research in important fields of politics, what have you. That's not happening. I was looking for years. I stopped. I'm not doing it anymore. I was looking for years for an evaluation, a really scholarly evaluation in English of the Chinese health insurance system and the reforms to healthcare in communist China because I knew I was caring about them. And during the years when I checked, it was one of those things where like once a year or once every 6 months or something, I would check around. Has anyone done this? There was nothing in English. There was zero. That research would cost money. It's not easy to reach. China's a huge country, in case you had, both in terms of population and geography. What the hell happened in Chinese healthcare, both health insurance and the actual, and the education system connected to it and the hospitals and how it all actually works? It's an incredibly important question. Frankly, how can we talk about reform to healthcare in the United States of America without referring to what's happened in China? It should be part of the comparative analysis. We should also talk about England and France. We should use all kinds of examples. Don't get me wrong. But I mean, China it's the single biggest example in the world and in the history of the world. Nobody's going to do that research. Nobody's going to do that writing. Nobody's going to publish it. And this, the economics matter. And this sense of competing with everything that ever came before, it matters also. So this is my ultimate concern. But sure, I think it's very sad and significant even in fiction. So look, I hate this, but I've never read The Catcher in the Rye, but it's not a book I think of positively. Okay, self-pitying middle-aged white man book. Whether it's you think of The Catcher in the Rye, you think of Woody Allen or something. As much as I may despise Woody Allen, as much as I may despise a book like The Catcher in the Rye or whatever, what if there is never going to be another Woody Allen? There's never going to be another Catcher in the Rye. There's never going to be writing of this kind, even within fiction. That's a huge change. And, where part of it is just that the recycling of the creative accomplishments of the past starts to overshadow and snuff out and undermine innovation in the present and the future. So I think the video game being proposed here about Julius Caesar, it's very unlikely to happen. And let me ask you, if you got together some investors, some multimillionaires in a room, you said, hey, we got 2 projects we can do here. I know this really brilliant, unestablished author, Eisel Mazard. This guy was in no way famous or well established. And we can do Eisel Mazard's Julius Caesar. So this is going to be a video game made in Unreal Engine 5. This is going to be a video game on PlayStation 5. We can do that. Or we can go with William Shakespeare. Who's going to sell more video games? Okay, so everything I've already said before actually would apply to this also. And what's going to make more money? My original innovative Julius Caesar game, or just reissuing Virtua Fighter 2 by Sega. Arcade Virtua Fighter 2 is going to make, like, taking something from the past like that and putting it on new hardware. And if those investors as individuals have to choose, maybe that's the choice they have. Well, on the whole, I'm going to put the money into Sega's Virtua Fighter 2 reissue. I think that's going to earn back the $10 million I'm putting into this. Yeah. Right. So this is another interesting asymmetry. Moonin Smith, who's become my most prolific commentator here, or commenter, not commentator, says, quote, Alex Becker taught himself how to program in 30 days, and he was able to design and recreate Doom Eternal. So Doom Eternal is a particular video game using free resources. So I think he's implying that he did this in a very short time, that one person working alone with these resources was able to recreate something the best. Right. And so this is what I want to emphasize, though. There is such a big gap between creating and recreating, right? I think what's being said here is true very broadly, not just about video games, but also about theater, also about movies. It's quite easy to, let's think of any hit movie from the past year. I know this has happened. There have been quite a few movie remakes. There was a movie that posted itself as promoted itself as a shot-for-shot remake of Psycho. The original film Psycho was by Alfred Hitchcock. So this was a new version of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. I'm not a fan of Alfred Hitchcock, by the way. Of course, if you go to any movie studio and say, oh, we're just going to make again the same movie someone made 50 years ago. We're going to do a new version of Psycho. We're going to have obviously new actors, new cameras, but the same script. I mean, again, you could do it as a shot-for-shot remake. All the cinematography is already done for you. All of the thought. Yeah, that's easy. Remaking a video game that already existed, that's easy, right? Making something new is hard. And it's hard partly because of risk, because you have to make the commitment. You personally have to take the risk to press into the unknown, to write something nobody's ever read before. It's challenging to the audience. It's challenging to the author, right? It's challenging to the creator. And of course, you're taking the risk it's going to be a flop in 10 different ways. Making something really new and really different. And who is going to bankroll that? Who is going to be able to pay their rent doing that? Obviously, I care about that much more for books than I do for video games. I care about it to some extent with theater and cinema too. I think it's a question that's worth asking and thinking about. And a huge percentage of the big budget projects today are in this sense retro. I'm sorry, but they're remaking Marvel comic books from the 1970s. It's ridiculous. And people are willing to invest millions of dollars to have yet another 1970s comic book like Moon Knight made into a movie and a TV show and this kind of thing. Oh, here's a slightly good idea someone had once in Avengers comics in the 1970s, and it becomes a multi-million-dollar film budget. Well, I just say there's a retro element here, and it's leaning on proven, known names. People already know who Spider-Man is, but who can really do something as new and original as Spider-Man was when it first came out? Who's out there really innovating? And economically, simply, not even talking about getting rich, who can pay their rent, really being an innovator, really being a creator in the culture of the 21st century? And guys, my answer is not me. Sorry, this is not meant to be a self-pitying video, but throughout my whole life, people said to me, you should write for a newspaper, you should write for a magazine. People at different times. This is before I had a YouTube channel too, when I was doing a lot of writing. People said to me, oh, you're such a talented writer, you should do this, you should do that. And what I had to say is, I'm sorry, look at the calendar. Give that advice to someone 50 years ago. 50 years ago, I could have earned a living in those. And I've had those conversations with my father, and so my father's now deceased. And I just said, no, you have to realize. Sorry, I'm not meaning to make this the topic of the video, but it is significant. When I was in high school, I was paid $300 per article to write articles for a local Toronto magazine. It was probably a couple hundred people read that magazine. Wasn't a huge international successful magazine or something. I'm sorry, probably distributed across Canada to some extent. Probably some copies were in Montreal or a few other places. Today, you can't get $300 an article to write for national, international publications. How you can't live as a journalist, you can't live as a writer, even if you're not thinking about becoming fabulously wealthy. And again, that has knock-on effects for the publishers, for the investors, for everyone else in the industry. And as I say, I said it only once in this video, but that's what I see happening with the future of video games too. I think they're going to become something more like the opera. They're going to become an area of the creative arts where it's predominantly not for-profit motivations that are shaping what's going on in terms of creativity and innovation. But yeah, look, this impacts me. This impacts my life. There's research I can't do. There's writing I can't do because there's no expectation of it ever generating money. And there's no expectation that it could even reach a significant audience, that it could reach a few thousand readers, right? And again, as much as we talk about competing for money, I've also said this, you're competing for people's time. People only have so much time. Why should they read your book about Julius Caesar instead of reading William Shakespeare's book about Julius Caesar? Why should they read your book about Napoleon Bonaparte instead of the 10 bestsellers about Napoleon Bonaparte? We could rank famous, respected books by people with famous names that are already out there. They're on the bookshelf competing with you about Napoleon Bonaparte. They're competing at a lower price with a greater reputation, right? And ultimately, even if people are so wealthy, they don't care. Even if people will pay $50 for your book when this other book is available for $5, they only have so much time. They only have so much time to read a book about Napoleon Bonaparte. They only have so much time to watch a play about Julius Caesar. So you lose. So our generation loses. And for the next generation, it's going to be even worse. So we start to go into fundamentally a culture of stasis. We become a curatorial culture rather than an innovative culture. And as with something as intrinsically conservative as Julius Shakespeare, pardon me, with something as intrinsically conservative as the history of Julius Caesar, like there's something conservative there. It's about something from the past that's set in stone, literally and figuratively. I think there actually is a really important need for innovation, for new voices, for new perspectives on Julius Caesar. I think there is a need for innovation, even with something as backward looking as that. Okay. But tell me, who is writing the equivalent play about the tragedy of America's army in Iraq? Who wrote the great drama of the American army in Afghanistan? Who now is writing about, the war in Ukraine and so on? You can look at things that are like, I think we do need innovation and creativity. And looking back at Julius Caesar, we do need innovation and creativity. And looking back at Napoleon Bonaparte, and partly because we need to draw new moral conclusions. We need to apply lessons from the past to the present. If you make a movie today about the Vietnam War, it competes against every other movie that's ever been made about the Vietnam War. And those movies are available for free. They're instant download for free, or maybe $5, maybe just the cost of printing and shipping. But, that's what you're competing with. If you have no name, you don't have a famous name, your movie doesn't have a famous name, how do you compete with all the movies that already exist about the Vietnam War? Now, again, as you know, this hasn't resulted in absolutely zero new movies being made about the Vietnam War. But I said originally, it's an issue of proportionality. When Sega Genesis came out, people were still buying Atari 2600 games, right? But we have moved on to a phase where the retro part of the market for video games, it's a larger and larger proportion of the market. I can't say it dominates the market, but I can certainly say it shapes the market, right? And yes, the accumulated literature of the past, in a very important sense, is snuffing out the production of literature for and about the future. So the only thing I'd say here, various intelligent comments. Thanks for your contributions, guys. And by the way, hit thumbs up if you have a moment to do so. It'll help more. In this case, it won't help more people discover the video in future because this video is going to be published on my new channel from Ink to Ink. So if you didn't get that, look in the description. This video will not be on the Obsolescence channel. It will be on from Ink to Ink. It's the first time I've done that, but welcome to this bold new world in which I have a separate channel for talking about issues of this kind. I think the name of the channel is self-explanatory, but maybe I'm going to get an avalanche of fan mail asking me to explain it. I've always had fan mail asking me to explain the meaning of abaliciel and also of ARIO, active research and informed opinion. So whenever I think something is self-explanatory, I'm probably wrong. So anyway, someone says, Bob says, quote, a lot of formerly super popular channels are pretty dead now. The algorithm is quite cruel. So I just say, it's not the topic of this video. I don't believe in the algorithm. I believe in human behavior. Like what we're observing is not the algorithm. What we're observing are changes in real human behavior. You know, we are seeing changes in what the viewers actually do and see. And, you know, what they want to see and what they're interested in. And I wouldn't describe that as cruel either. You know, I wouldn't. If you're a stand-up comedian and the audience doesn't laugh at your joke, I don't think you can attribute that to cruelty. Either you are creating videos for an audience or you're creating it for yourself. We could run a security camera in our kitchen showing us cooking. We could do that and make no effort to, then we wouldn't be able to have sex in the kitchen. So that's nuts. You know, you could set up a camera and just continuously broadcast security footage of your kitchen. So sometimes it's empty. Sometimes you can do that if you want to, right? And you could take the attitude, oh, you don't care how many people see it. You're doing it for yourself. You're not doing it for us. That may be literally true, you know. Like you can get down to those low ends where people say they're just creating content for themselves, and they are. You can write a book like a diary where you are just writing it for yourself. Diaristic writing exists. That's not what I'm talking about this video, and that's not what I do. If I'm going to do research and write about Cambodia, it's for you. It is, as I said at the start of this video, it is in a subtle sense to change the world. I'm going to research and write about Napoleon. It's for an audience. It's for a viewer. It's in some way to change the world. I think that's the fundamental motivation that unites fiction and nonfiction, and it also unites books and video games. I mean, I think it unites theater, film. This is something fiction and nonfiction and the creative arts, all these endeavors really have in common. But it differentiates that whole world from writing a diary where you're just writing for yourself. And it is certainly possible to just create YouTube videos. It's not for anyone else. It's for yourself. This exists. Someone suggests a video game made about Sulla, the Emperor of Rome. So I didn't want to get into the details of the economic argument in this way, partly just because I have talked about it in the past. Someone states here optimistically and totally incorrectly that independent games on Steam, he just says they do well. No, they don't. And I've done research on this and actually discussed it with Tommy Tallarico, of all famous people. The economics of independent game development, it is at best on a break-even basis. And you have to find those rare examples where developers were willing to disclose the books, open up the books and show where the money went. And I'm sorry, but I've talked through, I just don't want to talk about it because I've made YouTube videos talking about in the past. When you look at the actual numbers of even the most successful games that were award-winning, that were given bursaries, that had Kickstarter-type funding and donations, they don't. And also when you're talking about games that were made by just 3 people working together, it's horrifying to see that they may be money losing or they may really be like everyone's paid minimum wage on that basis. It's just barely break even. So no, even the most successful, pardon me, even the most successful indie games, you will be horrified to see what the economics are. And then when you look at it from an investor's perspective or from a creative artist perspective, we say, okay, if I invest in this game, what are the chances it's going to be a flop? What are the chances it's going to be only moderately successful? And then what are the chances that it's going to be this 1 in a million award-winning breakout hit? When you look at that economic spectrum of possibilities, there's basically no argument for supporting indie games at all. People do it out of passion. People do it because they love video games, which is itself not surprising. But yeah, I talked about that with Tommy Tallarico. And, writing a book doesn't cost you money in the same way that making a film does, or putting on a live play does, or developing and publishing a video game does, software or hardware for video games. They both cost money in terms of direct material costs. But what if writing a book costs you 2 years of your life? What if it's 2 years of your life? And then what are the likely outcomes? Partly economic, but partly in terms of reaching an audience, in terms of millions of people reading it, or just 10,000 people reading it, right? What's the spectrum of possibilities there? So will you invest your money in that? And will you invest years of your life in that? It's bleak. It's terrifying. It is dissuading a whole generation from in any way getting involved in the creative arts this way. And you have alternatives. So just you have to compare it to something. I had a friend who was a sculptor, and he was the first person I ever heard talk about this. Sorry, he was an aspiring sculptor. He wasn't a successful sculptor. He wanted to be an artist and be in sculpture at the time. I don't know what he did with his life. But I remember he would gripe, and in quite an amusing way. He would complain and gripe about how live musicians are the most, pampered and rewarded artists of them all. It's like, look at these people. The Canadian government has all these birds. They get free music lessons and a conservatory, and there are all these music venues. And the most mediocre person can go and do a live gig. And like, even if they're just paid $500, you're paid $500, you have a live audience, you perform in front of these people. There are all these institutions that support you. You're played on the radio. In Toronto at the time, that was really true. Like new bands trying to make it like a local band. There'd be these radio DJs that just to support them, even if they weren't that good. So, there's a new band and they're playing at the Elma Combo on Thursday, and the radio would announce your gig and support you. If you want to be a writer, there's nothing like that. I just wrote and published a new book. Can I get a radio interview? Can I get a radio interview in my own hometown? Can I get a radio interview on small time local radio? No. Is there going to be, we have a local newspaper here. Is there going to be a newspaper article about me and my book? Just a local newspaper, just reaching this city? No, but all of those things for a musician, right? If you do lounge music, like small audience, small venue, live music. You start doing jazz music from the 1930s as a lounge singer. You're on the radio, you're in the newspaper, and you're getting paid. Even if it's $500 per gig. As a writer, you don't get $500. Like even if it's $500, and soon enough it becomes $3,000 per gig. I remember 50 Cent saying that. 50 Cent's not the most wise guy, but I remember this is really the world he knows. You remember him saying, and he didn't say it in an articulate or charismatic way at all. He was kind of mumbling, but he said that he had no respect for broke rappers because he said, even if you are like an unsuccessful rapper, like you're not famous like him, and he knew what that was like because he had a phase of his career. He said, you make $3,000 per show. So just grind, just do a show 5 nights a week. Just do it again and again and again. Even if you're making $3,000 per show, that starts to add up. Like you're rich. Just don't be lazy. That was what he was complaining about. He felt that these new younger artists were lazy. They weren't willing to go out and do 5 gigs a week, which he alleges he had a period of time doing before he got famous. He was just touring and performing, getting a couple $1,000s here and there. But, obviously that also applies to $500 per show. Well, $500 per show isn't much. How many shows can you do a month, right? And maybe it's your part-time job. Maybe it's your full-time job. Okay, so that is an area of creativity and innovation that is in no way comparable to what we're talking about here. And the type of gamble you're talking about, anyway, it's just not comparable. If you live in Los Angeles, California, and you do lounge music. You're a live musician doing lounge music. What's your minimum estimate for your level of success and income? Like, oh, well, you're not very successful, so you only get booked to do gigs on like Wednesdays and Thursdays. Like, that's probably what it is. Like, you're a lounge act, but you don't have that much positive buzz. People aren't really that excited about it. It's not that bad. You can live in LA and you can be doing live music gigs on Wednesday and Thursday and meeting interesting people. And, you get the reward of the audience hearing you, and you get to find your audience and your audience finds you, right? It's not that bad. Well, the worst case scenario for these other types of creative endeavors, it's really, really bad. And guys, I'll be honest with you, I've never known anyone who could even articulate their bitterness about this. But I have known so many authors who spent like 10 years of their life on a book, right? They learned a new language. They went to the mountains of Myanmar. They went from village to village through a mountain range in Myanmar. You know what I mean? They learned how to speak some obscure language. They did the research. They wrote the book. They sunk the years of their life into it. And nobody ever read the book. They didn't make any money. They didn't reach any audience, and they are really bitter. So this is one example, but you can think of many examples of books people work for 5 years on or 10 years on, and there may be money involved as well as your own time and tears and effort. This is a long story that I'm going to try to make very short, but I met this guy who did quote unquote photo books. So he was a publisher just of coffee table books, big, beautiful coffee table books where each page is a whole picture. It's basically the format, Now, I've been in the publishing industry, as you know. I know about these things. And I think any of you would say right away, oh, it must be very easy to sell those books compared to something that looks like this. Must be easy. Compared to saying, hey, I'm going to write political philosophy and get 10,000 people to read having a big, beautiful book. Each page, people want to have this, give it as a gift, have it on a coffee table. It's a status symbol. It's beautiful. And I remember, so this guy was the publisher. He had made a few books himself. Like he had been the writer and photographer for a few books, but he was primarily the publisher of the book. And I remember him saying to me, and it was really bitter. It was so bitter. He said, we don't care about the money. And we know that we can't sell that many copies. Like the total range of sales is between like 0 and like maximum hit is 1,500 copies. Like that's what's possible. In this field, like you're struggling to sell 300 copies. That's what you're talking about. And you may have put 10 years of your life in the book. You may have put 5 years of your life, or you have all this work and all this stuff. He said, what we care about is having the book on display in the museum bookstore, in the art gallery bookstore, so the author can feel it was worth it. Like even if nobody buys it and nobody reads it, that it's on that stand. And now I did not say anything to this guy's face. I didn't want to insult him. But my wife at the time was there with me, my first wife, and it's an interesting time in my life. So I know bookstores, I know the book publishing industry, I know museums, I know art galleries. Whole different chapter of my life. I know about that world too. I remember, talking to my first wife afterwards and saying, can you believe the attitude of this guy? Like he just doesn't get it. If you want your book to be on display in that museum bookstore, in that art bookstore, you have to be absolutely the best of the best. And you have to compete with not just every other book published this year, not just every book published in the last 10 years. You are competing against every book published all time. They're selling in the museum bookstore a collection of photographs by Andy Warhol taken in 1965. And it's like there's only so much space in the bookstore, right? Or they can say to you, oh yeah, motherfucker, you think your books are so great. Dude, you think your books are great. Okay, do you want to take this spot away from Andy Warhol? That's who you're competing with. Like we have the greatest art books, the greatest books, photographs of paintings, journalism, whatever it is. Like you have to, oh yeah, this is a book. These are the most amazing photographs from World War II taken by this artist who was out with the army during World War II, some famous photographer during World War II. Oh, you want us to make space for your new book, which is photographs by some guy about some stuff. Nobody's heard of the guy. Nobody cares. Oh, you'd like me to make space for you by getting rid of Andy Warhol, by getting rid of these World War II. Oh, really? you are up against the best of the best, not from one moment, not from one generation, right? The museum is the perfect emblem of that. The art gallery is perfect emblem of that. The accumulated brilliance, the accumulated creativity of 1,000 years, right? And again, just the hubris of that he felt entitled. He felt that his photographers, his authors, the people creating these new books, that they were being wronged by being excluded from the art gallery bookstore, from the museum bookstore. I think that shows the mismatch between the attitudes of the generations, right? And for that whole period, 1880 to 1980, right, you would know that book would be worth more money in the future. You could buy it. It's not going to, dude, your books are worth nothing. And what's it going to be worth 5 years from now? You can have an 80% off sale for these books after they've sat in your warehouse. Like what is this worth? And all these photographs, anyone wants to, they can see them on Instagram. You can see, the book itself is obsolete, right? In all these ways. But to transmit a photograph between two people, this could be a PDF on the internet, but it could be an Instagram account. Like literally, you could take each page of the book and make each page one photograph on Instagram and have that. To say it's obsolete is an understatement. Okay, so some totally fine comments here, but take us slightly off topic. Someone asks, this is an intelligent question. I have nothing against this question. We have a lot of viewers from India these days, man. I think people in India relate to my toxic masculinity. I think the virtue discourse on this channel appeals to Hindu viewers. I've had several Hindu viewers write to me. Anyway, someone who I presume is in India from his name writes in asking, quote, I apologize for asking this, and I should probably just watch earlier videos to fully understand your position on video games. And he says he will do that. But do you think video games have no utility at all? Close quote. So it's a great question, and I like your way of phrasing it. It's not the way I would have phrased it, right? People have asked me, why do I regard video games as being so different from movies? Okay. I have known people who collected movies. I remember one guy, he had like a bookshelf in his apartment. The whole wall of the apartment was just movies accumulated in a huge bookshelf, right? So people buy movies, people spend money on movies, people spend a certain amount of time watching movies. I've never met anyone who ruined their life watching movies. I never met anyone who couldn't finish high school because they were addicted to watching movies. They never finished university because they were addicted to watching movies. In a country the size of the United States of America, maybe there are a few. Maybe there are a few people who dropped out of school because they were addicted to watching movies. All right. Video games. With my generation, already, a huge percentage of students ruin their lives because of video games. It's an epidemic, right? So that's my critique of video games. It doesn't have to do with utility. It has to do with, in plain English, ruining your life. The possibility of it ruining your life, the propensity for it to ruin your life. Now, I mean, there were jokes about this when Pac-Man came out. There was a satirical song by Weird Al Yankovic about Pac-Man ruining your life, right? For that generation, very few people were so obsessed with playing video games that it ruined their life. 1978, 1982, you got addicted to Scramble, the arcade game, maybe. Got addicted to the original Tempest arcade game, maybe. The number of hours you could spend playing those games is limited. From one generation to the next, video games in this sense, unironically, I really can say to you, they have become a bigger menace. When you talk to parents today, some parents have to struggle with a kid who becomes an alcoholic. When I was in Scotland, that's what parents were worried about. They're worried about, like, already at 11 years old, they were worried about their kids drinking whiskey. Kids could sneak whiskey away, 11, 12, 13. Kids start doing that. Kids start smoking cigarettes at that age. That was the main worry then, right? Now, today, how concerned are you about your kid getting involved with drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes compared to video game addiction? Video game addiction has become this massive, overwhelming, soul-destroying, life-altering problem. So that's the issue. And it's in that context that I say, well, the question of utility is kind of irrelevant to me. I have bought video games that teach you languages. I have a video game that's basically teach yourself Spanish. I have several really bad video games that are for teach yourself Chinese. I don't hate them, but they're not that great. If you want to talk about utility, is that hypothetically possible? And mysteriously, nobody is addicted to educational video games. For some reason, that's not our problem as a species. So, can hypothetically video games have some utility? Sure. And have I seen that myself? Sure. But that's very much in the shadow cast by this propensity that I have to ruin people's lives. And by the way, we stereotypically discuss this in relation to young people. Same with prostitution. Why do we only talk about sexy teenagers getting involved in prostitution? Aren't there middle-aged women? Aren't there older women whose lives are destroyed by prostitution? There's this kind of bias brought by the media that they're only interested in sexy teenagers. Well, video games are mostly talked about in terms of sexy teenagers. Guys, especially with the online games, they have the statistics. So how old are the people playing EverQuest? How old are the people playing RuneScape? There were a lot of middle-aged and even elderly people addicted to RuneScape today. So it's this cratering out effect, frankly, of the human species, cratering out of the human intellect. It's not just teenagers. This is a tremendous problem. And again, I've already stated it. I don't think it has to be a problem. You could play Pac-Man for 15 minutes a week. You could, and that could not be a problem. But the problem with video games is there are a lot of people. As I say, I can't say nobody is like that with movies. I personally have never known someone addicted to playing movies. I've never known someone who told me they were watching movies on Saturday and they started after they ate lunch and then they just kept going till 4:00 in the morning and they didn't sleep all that night. They just kept watching one movie after another past 4 a.m., 6 a.m., and they were just ruined. And everyone knows someone who did that with video games, or you've done it yourself, where you got so entranced. So it's different, Oh, we got a fan comment. Julius Shakespeare is a better name. You can name your kid that. That's not bad. That's not if you name your kid first name Julius, middle name Shakespeare. If your last name is Smith, Julius Shakespeare Smith or something, kind of a cute name. Anyway. As you can see, I'm catching up with your comments, guys. If you have something tremendously meaningful and interesting to say, now is a good. Here's $1 million idea. Here is an idea worth $1 million. Martin says, quote, I have a good idea for a new video game. You ready for this? It's a dating sim featuring Tikyo Sam and the challenges he must overcome to get laid and become an alpha male in Tokyo. Wow. Already, I can think of all kinds of great ideas for that game. That's true. And it could be partly satirical and partly sympathetic. You could have a lot of social and political commentary built into that. That could be a truly great video game. But maybe, you have to decide. Maybe there's more than one mode. But I would think at least one of the game modes, the joke is that you never get laid. That you play this game and it's just a perpetual process of failure. You fail in different ways again and again and again, and then until the game concludes. Maybe you have a difference between easy mode and hard mode that way. Great question, but have to be a separate video. Quote, where do you draw the line with honesty and vulnerability on YouTube? So great question. Melissa could make a video about that too or something, but probably everyone could. Look, for me, the question is, what are you going to be honest about? I feel like I'm 100% honest and I'm 100% vulnerable, but I only talk about the issues I really feel are worth talking about. Now I've had viewers complain to me. I remember I received some complaint. Oh, you go on and on about these romances with other women you had, these crushes you had in other women that didn't go anywhere or something. Well, I think, just my perspective, I think a very small percentage of my YouTube content is talking about my romance life that way or whatever. If I'm wrong, guys. I think that's a small percentage of this video, for example. But when I've talked about it, it's because I really felt there was a point. There was something important for me to say for the audience. It's not that I'm writing my diary. And so, for me, that issue of selecting it in that way, where I really think it's important, then I feel entitled to be 100% honest and 100% vulnerable. I feel like there isn't a problem with that. And maybe that would be more of a problem if I were saying things that I felt were silly or trivial or self-indulgent. I have had crushes on women I've never talked about on YouTube. You know what I mean? I have, there's stuff like this. And that's normally the sort of thing people talk about, being honest, being vulnerable. But like, I have no hesitation talking about the death of my father, my relationship with my father, and being 100% honest, 100% vulnerable about it, because I think it matters. And put it this way, as a creative artist, I want to make it matter. I want to tell you that, like, that to me is not self-indulgent or silly. So of course, like, I commit to it, talking about it, I'm 100% honest. And quitting video games, something I talk about, whatever, video game addiction as a cultural phenomenon. I don't think that's trivial. I don't think that's silly. So I'm going to really be honest and really be vulnerable in talking about it. That's how I see it. But if your whole life is silly and trivial, if everything you have to talk about is really shallow and self-indulgent, then I think you're going to struggle with honesty and vulnerability, because you're being honest and vulnerable about things that don't matter to anyone else, maybe don't matter to you. Yeah. So another question from Martin talks about video games that would help you learn Laotian or Cambodian. There are games. They're very poor quality. I've seen them on my mobile phone. I looked recently. There are games to help you learn Laotian and Cambodian. For many years, I was talking to computer programmers about that and trying to get projects like that going. And not just for Laotian, not just for Cambodian, not just for Pali, for Cree, Ojibwe, Mohawk, for indigenous languages, Dene, Blackfoot, the indigenous languages of North America, would be so important to get video games in those languages. So for many, many years, I've talked to people about that, and many YouTube videos about that. And it ain't happening.
There was a Turok, no Yurok.
It's a good joke, but I'd have to explain the joke. So it's a rare case where you really cracked me up on camera with that one, Melissa. That was good. So yeah, what I said about video games in relation to small budget independent games, this person is saying, a longtime subscriber, Do You Want to Give Me the Kiss, says, the economics of AAA titles is also on the edge, and thus they're having to resort to microtransactions, vaporware, etc. Yes. So I have also read a little bit about that. I mean, just put it this way: big budget video games can lose money. They can be a loss rather than a profit. And there are innumerable examples of that. And I think it's the same pattern I've already talked about. So we've most talked about small budget video games, but still, if it's only $1 million, you're risking $1 million. Are you going to earn $1 million back? And you can get into tens of millions of dollars with video game budgets, just like cinema. If you're an investor, what is the most reliable big budget video game? The most reliable AAA video game? It's the same with William Shakespeare. It's going to be Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, right? It's going to be another Mario game. It's going to be another Metro game. It's going to be something derivative and not innovative. It's going to be something neoclassical, if you like. So yes, but it's true what you say. Big budget video games are also on the edge. And, cinema is really a tremendously profitable, it's really the most profitable segment of the creative world, of the creative economy. It has been very reliably profitable. But I think that question has to be asked. There was a brief period when Amazon Video was paying everyone quite well. I have a book about this. And there was all this optimism amongst filmmakers in LA. Oh, you can sign up and put your film on Amazon and it pays a certain amount. And then the money disappeared. The money tanked. How much money is there in Amazon buying up people's films and putting them on their video service? How much money is there in Netflix? Obviously, some people just look at the most successful examples and then think very optimistically about that. You can do that with the book publishing industry too. You can say, "Oh, look how much money Harry Potter made." You can write a book that makes millions of dollars. If you only look at the most successful examples of books, of movies, of streaming TV shows, and of big budget video games. But boy, really think about it as an investor. And what are the odds involved? What's the range of possible outcomes? The type of risk here is tremendous. And again, people have an alternative. You can do stand-up comedy. You can be a live music act doing lounge singing. Not everything is like this. So yeah, and look, sorry, what I'm hinting at is the possibility that the future of cinema, this might be much more of a problem for it. It might become harder to justify big budget movies as well as small budget ones. But for the moment, that's not the case. For the moment, big budget films are so reliably profitable that they still get hundreds of millions of dollars. Whereas the risk of doing a small budget film, for example, making a documentary. You want to make a documentary movie about veganism? You want to make a documentary movie about police brutality? Do you want to make a documentary movie about corruption in the election system? How much money is that going to make? Right. So again, this is the same. Sorry, I do think this is worth talking through. We'll wrap it up soon, guys. But I do think this is the same kind of self-deceptive thinking. Bob says, and thanks for your comments, Bob. I realize these are well-intentioned comments. Bob says, "quote I would say there will always be top indie games that will manage to make a lot of money relative to their small budgets." You just made the error I described. I can say to you, there will always be books that make a lot of money. There will always be another hit book like Harry Potter. Let's say you want to write detective fiction, right? Crime noir fiction, true crime fiction, even whatever you want to say. Okay, if you only look at the 10 most successful books this year, right, that doesn't give you a sense of what your position in the world is as a creative artist, as a writer, as a researcher, etc. It doesn't give you a sense of the attitude of the investors or of the industry, right? Guess what? Yeah, okay. There was one book last year that made a lot of money, a detective story. There was one indie game that was profitable. You really have to get beyond this way of thinking. You have to think about the millions of authors who fail every year, right? With video games, it's not millions of creative teams, but you have to look at the many, many thousands of creative teams. You have to look at the mediocre examples. And I'm sorry, it is not a profitable industry. The industry as a whole, even if you can look at one example that turned a profit, I'm telling you, even when you look at award-winning and successful indie games, that industry is existing on a break-even basis. I just mentioned that the people who are willing to talk about it honestly, they're normally programmers who are making their money elsewhere. There's let's say, hypothetical example, but this is pretty close to that. You'll get a programmer who says that, look, he makes his money doing security work for the banking industry. So programming and dealing with hacking and malfeasance and this kind of thing. So okay, the banking industry pays him a huge amount of money to do computer security work. This is, again, programming related to the bank's needs. Okay, so he does that for so many hours a month or so many, and he makes a lot of money. And then he'll say to you openly that he does these independent video games because he loves them, because he grew up with video games. It's his passion or whatever. He puts a certain amount of time and money to that. But they never make any money, or never make any money to speak of, compared to the other ways he can earn money as a highly skilled coder. So video games are unusual that way, in that the people who have the skills can make a lot of money out of those skills, but doing a different kind of computer programming, right? So on and on it goes. But yeah, no, that it really, I'm just telling you, you can do more reading. You're going to disagree with me, but my impression really is that no, that is making the transition to be something much more like live theater today, where these are passion projects for people, but they have a very, very low likelihood of earning a significant amount of money. And even the ones that do earn a significant amount of money, think about how much they're paying the programmer, how much they're paying the coder. They can't pay as much as I knew a guy who was a computer programmer for the mining industry, for gold mining, for analyzing satellite data for the mining industry. That pays real money. You're paid a lot of money to do that work as a computer programmer, right? And you can never make that out of an independent game that's downloaded from Steam for 80% off. It only costs you $5. And guess what? It's a 60-40 split. 40% of the money goes to the app store that you bought it from, goes to the middleman. The programmers are getting nothing. The skilled people who are doing all the labor are getting paid very, very little. And they themselves will say they're doing this as a passion project because they love it, etc. And the people who are most honest about it are normally the ones who have some other way to make money. With writers, they don't. How am I going to make money? How can I support myself as a writer? It's a new tragedy in the 21st century. You might think that's an old story, but it's not. There used to be a lot of money in book publishing. There really used to be possible to earn a living as a newspaper writer, as a magazine writer, and work on your book in your spare time. Then when your book came out, you actually made a lot of money, and then you got an advance from the publisher for your next book. That is all gone. And, we have to think about how are we going to change the world now that the internet has changed publishing, now that the internet has changed the role of the author and the researcher forever, now that the internet has changed cultural production. How are we going to innovate? How are we going to produce a new and different culture for the future? We all have new ideas. We don't have our new methods of monetizing them, our new methods of making them pay someone's rent so that they can get out and do the innovation, do the creative work, etc. Okay, Kutlu asks, and this is going to wrap up the live stream, guys. If anyone has anything else intelligent to say, let me know. Kutlu says, quote, I don't like your comparison between Pac-Man and Shakespeare. Will Pac-Man be passed down between the generations as Shakespeare's plays have been? Yes, it's already happened, and it still is happening. We now have several generations of Pac-Man. And the question is, he reiterates or says further, quote, how many small children are growing up with Pac-Man today? And he says Pac-Man and its legacy will die with the people who grow up with it. You're wrong. I'm sorry. Mario has gone from one generation to the next. The original Mario Brothers, very few people played it. The very first Mario Brothers game. That's before Super Mario, by the way. Very few people play that. Guess what? You had another generation that grew up playing Mario Party. Another generation that grew up playing Mario 64. Another generation grows up playing Mario Odyssey. No, Mario's significance goes on forever. And if anything, it's only grown. It's become bigger. And I can say the same about Pac-Man. And so my point is, this pattern is actually much more powerful with a cultural phenomenon like that, like Super Mario Brothers or Pac-Man, than it is with Shakespeare. If I ask the question, how many kids grow up with William Shakespeare? It's completely surreal. People aren't shaped by Shakespeare that way. But let me put it to you this way, because we're talking about kids in particular. All right. What if you want to make a new program for children that's different from Sesame Street, that's better than Sesame Street? And I feel this way. I don't want kids to go on watching the same fucking cartoon about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. The extent to which children's entertainment is this Ouroboros, this self-devouring serpent of the same crap getting exploited again and again. I don't want the next generation to watch Harry Potter. I don't want the next generation to watch X-Men and Batman. If Batman were meaningful in the 1930s, is it still meaningful today? Well, I'm just sick of it. And it is sickening to me. And it's partly a moral and political thing. I'm really disgusted by the morality of Batman. I don't want to raise my daughter, or in future, if I hypothetically have a son, I don't want my daughter or son to grow up thinking that you solve problems with your fists, that you make the world a better place by running down alleyways and punching people. And all that stuff affected me growing up. So you look at the reality of children's entertainment and children's fiction, because Shakespeare is not, right? You say, okay, what are the prospects? Can I get some investors together to support me? Will I do something really new and different that's going to compete with and try to replace Sesame Street? Well, the part of the problem is that the success of Sesame Street is so tremendous. The accumulated library of Sesame Street is so enormous, and it's available for free. I mean, you can watch old Sesame Street episodes on YouTube right now. You can either watch this for nothing, or again, it's like $5. Get it on DVD. Get the past season of Sesame Street. And Sesame Street, they do recycle their own content. I've seen this where they took all the different segments of Elmo and they put that together. They make a new show, just the Elmo segments. They take some of this old stuff and so on. And say, well, guess what? The potential, the possibility, the opportunity for me, right, to create something really new and different and better in children's entertainment. It's not the case that Sesame Street paved the way for the next generation. Tragically, paradoxically, Sesame Street is snuffing out the possibility of something better replacing it. And I feel the same way about, the iconic success of Batman, Superman, the X-Men, Spider-Man. There is something better. There's a better moral to the story you can teach your children than these shitty fables about Spider-Man, these shitty fables about Superman that were never that meaningful to begin with and have become meaningless and banal now. But if you can't even pay your rent, we're not talking about a profit motive. It's not the dream that you're going to become a multimillionaire. If you can't pay the rent, if the investors can't make back their initial capital outlay, if nobody can support this kind of innovation, this kind of experimentation, right? What happens? We start to have a culture in a sickening kind of stasis. Instead of innovation, we get a kind of perpetual curatorship.